Welcome to English 430 and 560. These are the podcasts for Shakespeare's drama, produced by and starring Dr. Bill Dines.
The Winter's Tale was probably first produced in the year 1611. We have the report of a Dr. Simon Forman, who wrote in his journal of seeing, quote, how Leontes, the king of Sicilia, was overcome with jealousy of his wife with the king of Bohemia, his friend, end quote. In order to introduce the play, however, we might have to go back a couple of years, to 1609, which is when the king's men finally began performing in their private indoors theater, the Blackfriars. James Burbage, father of Richard and the entrepreneur who built the original theater in 1587, had tried to secure a second playhouse, one that would be indoors and thus permit performances regardless of the unpredictable London weather, as far back as 1596, when the company was still the Lord Chamberlain's men and their reputation was riding high on the popularity of plays like Romeo and Juliet and A Midsummer Night's Dream. But that effort in 1597 was foiled by wealthy Londoners living near the proposed playing house, who worried about the confusion and mess that might be caused by the daily press of playgoers. Blackfriars was used off and on after 1600 by children's companies, but it wasn't until 1608 that the company led by Burbage and Shakespeare finally secured the lease, and it was the fall of 1609 before the new playhouse was open for business. Blackfriars represented a departure for the king's men in two crucial ways. On the one hand, it was an indoors theater, seating perhaps 700 people, and so far more intimate and nuanced than the noisy, bustling Globe. On the other hand, it catered to a more elite audience. According to biographer Peter Ackroyd, the basic admission to Blackfriars was 6 pennies, compared to the 1 penny that it cost to get into the yard of the Globe. Wealthier patrons could spend a shilling, or 12 pence, to sit on a bench, or 30 pennies for a box seat. For 2 shillings, you could get a stool on the stage itself, though the gentlemen who did that seemed to have been more interested in being seen than they were in actually seeing the action of the play. Why does all this matter for a conversation about The Winter's Tale? Even after moving into Blackfriars, the king's men continued their performances at the Globe. That's where Dr. Forman saw the play. And they don't seem to have deliberately designed their productions for one space or another. But in the late romances, those quirky, hard-to-define plays at the end of his career, Shakespeare has clearly taken advantage of some of the new opportunities that playing indoors, on a stage lit by candlelight before a more intimate and sophisticated audience, had to offer. In both The Winter's Tale and The Tempest, watch for the emphasis on music and spectacle. For example, song and dance occupy a significant amount of stage time in both of these plays. And while Shakespeare never lost his taste for ritual and ceremony, I think that we can say that these elements gain a special prominence in these later plays. I won't spoil the ending of the play for you, but it's hard to imagine Shakespeare writing that scene, at least in the same way, when he only had the bare, broad Globe stage to work with. More importantly, for me at least, the more intimate and focused playing space of the Blackfriars gave Richard Burbage the venue he needed to really shine. His playing style had always been more naturalistic and nuanced than Edward Allen's, his chief competitor with the Admiral's men. And in The Winter's Tale and The Tempest, it seems to me that Shakespeare is giving Burbage the opportunity to develop those skills further. Leontes' jealous rage and the wild bombast work well on the Globe stage before 3,000 watchers. But the motivating moments of the play come in scene 2, as Leontes watches his wife Hermione chat with their friend Polixenes. Shakespeare is not terribly interested in giving Leontes the kind of psychologically plausible motivation for his jealousy that modern audiences might prefer, and we'll talk about that problem in class. But the playwright is interested in how Leontes' immediate reaction to the immediate experience developed a weight and momentum of its own. That doesn't translate well to the page, perhaps, but it's absolutely overpowering on stage. And in the friendly confines of the New Blackfriars, it must have been terribly effective. As you read The Winter's Tale, then, I hope you'll keep an eye on the manner in which close observation and intimacy become dominant themes, both in positive and negative ways. The shocking finale of the play won't make any sense otherwise, and we need to give it its due. Another way of introducing the themes and the ideas of this play doesn't involve going back to 1609 at all. In fact, we go all the way back to 1592. In that year, a hack writer, an occasional dramatist named Robert Greene, lay dying in London. Greene was a graduate of Cambridge and spent a brief but wild career writing everything from plays to salacious pamphlets. Yet he had a clear and important impact on the newly emerging theater world in the late 1580s, and his work influenced both Christopher Marlowe and the young Shakespeare. Bob Greene apparently liked to party, however, and liked to spend money, and didn't appreciate the way that these new actors and writers were coming up, stealing his glory, squeezing him out. In a pamphlet published in the year of his death, he lashed out at, quote, "an upstart crow beautified with our feathers, that in his tiger's heart, wrapped in a player's hide, supposes he is as well able to bombast out a blank verse as the best of you. And being an absolute Johannes factotum, is in his own conceit the only shake scene in the country." End quote. The phrase tiger's heart wrapped in a player's hide recalls a line from Henry VI, Part 3, one of Shakespeare's very first plays. And the term shake scene makes it pretty clear that Greene was talking about our friend Will. Whether he was accusing Shakespeare of plagiarizing his work, or simply for being too big for his britches, that's not real clear. But Greene evidently didn't think that this new player and writer had much to offer. All of this would be merely historical data, our first printed reference to Shakespeare as a factor in the London dramatic environment. Except that Greene also wrote an early romantic fiction, kind of potboiler called Pandosto. And it's this that Shakespeare cribbed 18 years later for the basic plot for his play A Winter's Tale. Shakespeare evidently knew all about revenge, even on an opponent long dead. Pandosto was designed to preach against the evils of jealousy, a theme perhaps Robert Greene should have paid a little bit more attention to himself. Shakespeare uses that as a jumping-off point. As I've mentioned, the opening scenes of the play don't waste our time making Leontes' jealousy understandable. What matters is that we believe Leontes is jealous, and that's hard to deny. But the man who wrote King Lear was also deeply interested in the way private obsessions, personal mistakes, emotional turmoil can spread out, can set in motion much larger and unforeseen consequences. As you read, watch the way cause and effect work in this play. How long, for example, does it take for Leontes to learn the error of his ways? How long does it take for that education to have its own consequences? Set against the ritual and ceremony that I mentioned earlier, then, is the working of natural processes, both internal, like jealousy and love, and external, like the changing of the seasons or the passing of years. One of the more surprising structural elements of The Winter's Tale is the abrupt shift between Acts 3 and 4, between the court world of Sicilia and the green world of Bohemia. It's possible that Shakespeare himself played the chorus time who announces this shift. We've seen this structure plenty of times before. How is Shakespeare using it here that's different than the way he used it in A Midsummer Night's Dream, for example? One other point to mention. This play contains one of my two favorite stage directions in all of Shakespeare. One of those favorites is in Macbeth, when Macduff enters with Macbeth's head. The other is here. See if you can find it.